Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lubkeman. I am the head of foresight at ETH Zurich and your host for today's global lecture and dialogue entitled Healing Our Future. I have to say, I am personally really thrilled to be doing this with two, I would say, heroes within our current dialogues around what our world needs. And this is going to be really a fantastic hour. The ETH Global Lecture Series is a platform for contemporary global topics to be discussed with outstanding global thinkers. Each month, we're bringing to you two amazing people to discuss their personal insights, experiences, expertise. In addition to simply learning, our goals are to broaden our perspectives of a contemporary topic so we can all deepen our understanding of that, challenge ourselves, challenge our opinions, and through this, make a meaningful contribution to issues which we're all either confronting or working on. And today we're having a premiere, which is pretty cool. Some of you might have attended some of the other previous global lectures, but now we are in the special new location of the ETH virtual studio. And we're having an incredible aura around us, which unfortunately, Sonia and I can't see. We're just sitting in a green room. I'm not supposed to tell you that, but we are, and it's really cool. It's cool to sit here. So, our guest today is first Paul Hawken, who starts ecological businesses, writes about nature and commerce, consults with heads of state, CEOs, and many, many others on climatic, economic, and ecologic regeneration. Excuse me. He's the founder of Regeneration.org, and his latest work, which I have not yet seen in my hand, is a book entitled Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. It was published just recently in the United States and the UK. So Paul, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. It was published September 14th in the UK and 2 days ago in the United States. And somehow I'm really sorry that you didn't get a copy beforehand. A lot of people didn't because it was delayed by both COVID and by Hurricane Ida here in the United States. And so I only got a copy 4 days ago myself. So well, I don't want you to feel left out.
I appreciate that. And I promise you, I will really look into it. When I get it, I seriously can't wait to get it. So his ETH discussion partner sitting right next to me here is Sonia Seneviratne, professor for land climate dynamics here. Mm-hmm. I got that right?
Yes,
okay.
Thanks.
And your research, you're investigating climate extremes, droughts, heat waves, land climate processes, and human-induced climate change, all based on deep modeling and analysis, right? You include ground and satellite observations in all of your work, getting better and better, and you are also a lead author of the recent IPCC special report on the 1.5 degrees global warming, correct?
Yeah, and the one that was published in August.
And the one that was published in August as well?
ER6, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ah, okay, well, we're going to look forward to hearing more about the good news in a little bit. But before we get to that, our time together is going to be about 1 hour. We'll end right on time. I'll start our dialogue with you, Paul, and then we'll come back to Sonia, and then you, our audience, will have a chance to put in questions. Actually, your questions can come in anytime. And they'll all be logged. I'll be able to see them, so you can put them to either Paul, Sonia, anything you want, you can welcome to ask. And I'll be inserting them into my chat. So I won't be asking you to give them, but I will be incorporating as many of them as I can. I can't promise all of them, but I'll do the best I can. So, are we ready?
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So, Paul, tell us a bit more about your book, Regeneration. What is it about, and why did you do it?
Well, simply stated, and I'm so glad to be here with the lead author of the sixth assessment for the IPCC. So, Sonia, thank you so much for your amazing work. The book that preceded Regeneration was called Drawdown, and that book came out in my mind when the third assessment came out in 2001. And I began to go around to NGOs and institutions, educational institutions that I knew of, and said, we should map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to, and then this is the second part, to a goal that made sense to me, which is reversing global warming. And I felt like at that time and to this day, the language around global warming had been basically made ridiculous. Fighting, combating, tackling, mitigating. These are verbs, these are not goals, and they're obviously very much male sports and war metaphors. And I felt that that languaging around the changes in climate were othering it, that is, making it something out there somewhere that it was in it and that we could fix. And therefore, this, in a sense, disconnecting people, humanity, from the true cause, because nature never makes a mistake. I mean, so we do. And it's this relationship between us, and also to really make the point that the biosphere and the atmosphere are really one thing. Of course, the atmosphere is gaseous and the biosphere is material, but you really can't have, there's no line, there's no demarcation point really, except in our mind. And so anyway, I said nature never makes a mistake. We do. And that we should be focusing on what we're doing to influence the atmosphere, not to other it in that language. So anyway, in 2013, an article came out by Bill McKibben in Rolling Stone, said global warming's terrifying new math. And he had looked at the work of Mark Campanale at Carbon Tracker in London. And Mark had looked at the balance sheet of every coal, gas, and oil company he could get his hands on, and to look at their reserves. That is, what were the reserves, which are classified as assets on their balance sheet. And he pointed out and coined the term unburnable carbon. That is to say, it may be an asset on your balance sheet, but if we burn it all, we're Venus. So it doesn't make any sense at all to call it an asset. And what Bill McKibben did in his Rolling Stone piece is set a match to all that unburnable carbon, and it was terrifying. And it worked, and people came to me and said, it's a game over, you know, we're done, we're cooked, we're screwed, all that sort of stuff. And I thought, actually, sometimes when we give up, so to speak, we actually are open to new possibility. And so I got a group of people, 3 people, together, and we formed Project Drawdown, and we had researchers from 6 continents, from 60 people, from Sri Lanka, Sonia, by the way, from India, from all over the world. These are scholars, you know, young postdocs and docs and others, you know, and together we created a methodology to map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And I published that book in 2017. It's now in 18 languages. It is taught from 4th grade to MIT graduate school and more. But at that time, I knew I wanted to do regeneration. And the reason for that is drawdown is a what to do. Okay, they're extant solutions, and this is what we need to do. But it doesn't tell you how to do it at all. And how to do it is really important. And not only that, there was a tendency, particularly in America, for people to look at the top solutions, that is, in terms of the modeling assumptions about what impact they would have over the next 20, 30 years with respect to reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or sequestration, that is, how much they would draw down in the case of photosynthetic processes, and started to look at them like the top 10 songs on the hit parade. And that's just not right, because the top one was refrigerant management, which is technically true because of the global warming potential of CFCs and HCFCs, yeah, but that had been already taken care of in the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And the fact is that this is an area where governments are extremely capable and effective in terms of regulation. And so Regeneration is fundamentally a how to get it done book. It's a do book as opposed to maybe a more conceptual look. So it's very mechanistic drawdown, and Regeneration, you can tell by the title, is systemic. It's about the whole system. And it asks the question and hopefully tries to answer it, why 98% of humanity is completely disengaged from global warming and the climate crisis. And you have to ask yourselves, how after 45, 50 years in the public sphere did we do that? I'm not blaming those people, not at all. I'm just saying, what the heck were we doing? How are we communicating to ensure that the vast majority of humanity would be checked out on this issue?
That's pretty. So the systemic focus, and this is something, because I think, let me just summarize as I understand, with drawdown, you're really looking at mostly elements, and with regeneration, looking at the system. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So really, one needs to actually have them together, and so you can think systemically, and there's different what you can do within that system. Now, you have in the back of the book, I was looking at it just before I came, sort of this hit list of the top 10, as you said, like the top 10 hits from Casey Kasem or something that you. So if we did these first 1, 2, 3s, then we're done. Right? But you're saying that's not the case. We shouldn't be looking at this as a top 10 list. It's just here's just 100 things we could do.
With all due respect, and Sonia will back me up on this one, models are models. They're not reality. The climate models over the last 20 years have converged, and they were divergent when they first started modeling. They came up with more disparate results. Now it's not so much the case. But models, in this case with solutions, are based on very, very interesting assumptions.
I'm going to turn to Sonia and ask a little bit, so he can talk to the modeling. He just said we're starting to really converge. This is a lot of your work is in this world. Can you explain just what has happened in the past 10 years in this one domain, within your...
Yeah, so models were already converging, I think, about 10 years ago. I would say, in my opinion, what is more converging is actually the observations and the models. So I think we are saying now really observational evidence of what the models were predicting. And a typical example is climate extremes that we experienced this summer. I would say this is consistent with what we have in models. If anything, it's maybe a bit stronger. But what we are seeing is that the observations basically confirm what the models are predicting. And so we have this convergence of results.
If I recall correctly, and that there was a whole series of lines saying, well, this could be this bad, it could be that bad, it could be that bad. So I just want to finish up with Sonia on this one. So when you're saying the observation of confirming, which of those scenarios is it confirming, or?
No, so basically what they are confirming is, I think what we see from models is actually not so much divergence about responses, for instance, at 1.5 degree of global warming, 2 degrees. And there is still a bit of divergence about when this is going to happen, but we can predict well basically what we expect with 1.5 degree or 2 degree of global warming. The models actually converge on that. And what the observations tell us is basically how much warming we have had so far. So I would say that's where we can make the link between the two. Yeah.
That's comforting and scary at the same time.
Yeah. So I would say at the moment we are rather following, the worst trajectory, and we are not on the right path to limit global warming within the window that is basically envisaged within the Paris Agreement. But we still have a chance. So the last IPCC report is just saying if we act right away, basically with the best scenario possible, I think the uncertainty is not actually in the climate system. It is in the human system. It's about what we are going to do. But if we follow the pathway where we have most mitigation, basically we could limit global warming around 1.6 degrees and then go back to 1.5. So the uncertainty is us. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of, so let's come back to Paul. You're starting to say some things about the assumptions that you were going on.
Yeah. Our models. It's interesting what Sonia's talking about in terms of climate models because they actually use real-time events, and that's that iterative process of modeling. Well, okay, here's our model. This is what happened this year, and so forth. And then that was an iterative process where the models became more refined and more accurate. Not to say that the predictions 25, 30 years ago actually were very, very good, actually, in hindsight. The difference, which he just pointed out, was that things are happening a little bit faster, more than a little bit faster than predicted. But in terms of drawdown models, the fact is we are based on business as usual scenarios put forth by the IEA, the World Bank, and the IPCC itself. So we used all three of those and we converged them into one data set. But those predict that the economy will grow by 2.3 times by 2050 and 7 times by 2100. And we think that's completely ridiculous because by focusing on fossil fuels and then in turn renewable energy, which is absolutely imperative since 80% of our CO2 emissions right now are from fire, from combustion of coal, gas, and oil, makes total sense. But the assumption has been that if we get that right, in a reasonable amount of time, that we get a hall pass to the 22nd century. And I'd say, well, no, wait a minute. That's not true at all. Because you can destroy the world just as well with renewable energy as you can with non-renewable energy. You can have a battery-powered chainsaw that is, charged by renewable energy that's cutting down the Amazon. So by just focusing on renewable energy, we've actually lost sight of both cause and the source of not just healing it or abating, but we've lost the source of involvement and what is possible. And we've looked at addressing the climate crisis as almost out of guilt and obligation, and we should, and if we don't, this will happen, and that's true. That's great science, but not the guilt part and not the obligation part. And where Regeneration is trying to show that actually is trying to have much bigger arms and look at this from a systemic point of view. And if you look at the solutions in Drawdown, in Regeneration, and in the website of Regeneration, we have a listing and network of every known climate solution that's extant and how to get it done. Right, it's the largest collection of solutions in one area, that we know of actually. But if there were no Sonias in the world, if there wasn't a climate scientist alive, if we didn't know, if we were clueless about extreme weather, like, Hurricane Ida, that was really bad, what happened? We don't know. If you wipe all that out for a second and then you look at those solutions, we would want to do every single one of them because they have such amazing cascading benefits for humankind, our children, the future, our health, for water, for the oceans. And you just go check, 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 check. So the idea that we somehow should divert or, to solve this crisis actually is one of the reasons that it's been siloed. It's been over there, and maybe governments will get it done, or maybe the Conference of the Parties will do something after 25 years, and it hasn't done anything yet, virtually, frankly. And what we've lost is everything between the individual and big institutions, and that's where we will solve the problem, because we're not going to solve it by cumbersome institutions that are institutional, and we're not going to solve it by constantly saying this is what you can do, this is, because by individuating it and somehow making the individual, the person, responsible, which is what British Petroleum did in 2001. And they took a playbook from the tobacco industry and said, hey, we just drill oil wells and make gas, you drive. Then somehow if you can change your driving habits and do your carbon calculator and you could understand your footprint, you could make a big difference, And I feel like that what that did to individuals is like, hey, it disempowers individuals actually, because they know how big the problem is. Yeah,
that's actually really fascinating for me, and I was sort of musing. I had a quick muse on the post-combustion society, as you were thinking once we end, and what that might look like, and as a regeneration idea. That's kind of fun. But I want to come back to you, Sonia, and it is, tell us a little bit more about the report which you co-authored, which more or less said, we've got 1.5, more or less no matter what, get used to it, society, get your head around this, it's urgent.
Yeah, so the report, ETH was published in August, and it's basically providing the state of change in climate. And I would say, as a climate scientist, I would say it clearly shows that we have a climate crisis. So it shows, I think already only the observations are showing this. So we already have about 1.2 degree of global warming. The past decade we had 1.1. So we are getting very close to 1.5. And I mean, if you look in the past, the rate of change of global warming, it's unprecedented in 2,000 years. And the level of global warming we have reached is unprecedented in 100,000 years. So if we think of our history, we have had agriculture, all of this was the history, of human civilization, all happened under warming levels that were lower than what we are having today. So I think we really need to wake up and realize we are, in terrible situation in the sense that we have pushed ourselves outside the, typical equilibrium we had before. Now, in terms of what is going to happen with more global warming, so I was coordinating the chapter on climate extremes, and there we see clearly that first, we have had increases in climate extremes everywhere. So I think that's another really important message. Is no region is really spared. Basically, all regions already have some changes in extremes. And then with additional warming, we would have a multiplication of those changes in extremes. So all regions would be affected by several changes in extremes at the same time. So as we have seen, for instance, in Europe, we have a tendency towards more heat wave, but also to more heavy precipitation and towards drought. So that's one aspect. Plus, we have also more risk of having climate extremes at the same time in different locations. And that's where mitigation plays an important role. So knowing that if we limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, it would avoid much more risk, even though I would say we don't have a guarantee that 1.5 degree would be safe, but that's the best bet we have at the moment. It's basically the best we can achieve. We would anyway probably go above it, about at 1.6, and then we could stabilize at 1.5. But for this, we need immediate action. So according to those scenarios, we would need to basically halve our emissions until 2030, more or less. So it's just that we're seeing that those changes, are happening, and it's getting worse every year. And I hope this is going to be a wake-up call. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. Paul, if you're this fortuitous, or perhaps you did it on purpose, that your books came out a month after your report. And essentially, for me, when I hear what you're saying, and we hear this and we internalize what you're saying, we need Paul's systemic change more than ever. I mean, this has to happen now. Definitely we need to get to a net zero CO2 world, which I think is also what is meant with regeneration. So the idea is that you are not affecting
for instance, in terms of CO2, at least, you know, you're not putting more CO2 than CO2 is taken up by the Earth system. But I assume what Paul means with regeneration goes further even than that. So it's basically our whole footprint on the Earth system. I think for me, one really important message is we often speak of net zero CO2 maybe by 2040 or 2050, but we need to get on this pathway right now. I think Paul is saying the same thing, but for me it's really essential that we set ourselves goals for 2022, 2023. There is some danger of just always postponing the goalpost. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul, why now? Why this book now? And because you were just saying before, it's on the number one on the book list at the moment. Why is that? Why do you think?
Well, I mean, it took almost 4 years to create the book. So I mean, this is when it came out.
Chris, it just took some time.
Yeah, it wasn't. We just totaled up the citations. The book has no footnotes, you know, and even the citations would take up 70 pages, so that's not in the book. But we just totaled them up the other day, and there's 7,262 citations in the book. Wow. And the reason for that is the book is really about stories and narrative and so forth, but we stand on a floor, and that floor is science. If it's not science-based, then we're going, hey, come on. So it's not about opinion, you know. And what you're supposed to do on the floor is dance, you know. The floor isn't the purpose. Right. It allows you to do something. In the case of the IPCC and the sixth assessment, you know, hopefully it gives people a perspective that actually was there in SR6. It's been there for a long time. There was very little new in sixth assessment that people weren't tracking this on a daily basis. So, you know, it all came together. It was really great. And what was interesting about it came out during a time when the Northern Hemisphere was on fire. From Siberia to Greece to Spain to Canada to California to Oregon and so forth. And many of these fires we actually couldn't put out, and we still can't. I mean, the Dixie and so forth. And this is a new regime, and this is what I think, you know, we have to look at in terms of, and Sonia's the expert in this, in terms of extreme weather, which is we're going into, we would call it ecological regimes is another way to look at it and so forth, that we've never seen before and so forth. Somebody asked me, what's happening in California? And I said, well, we used to be France, and now we're going to be Spain, you know. I mean, we're changing from one, you know, regime, if you will, to another, and nothing is going to stop that. But the very fact that the sixth assessment, again, look at the timing, and then look what's happening in terms of weather, in terms of drought, in terms of unusual precipitation on the East Coast, and obviously in Europe as well, you know, was a teachable moment. Now, will it take? I don't know. But I feel like regeneration is something that has been emergent. It's a burgeoning movement in the world. And I think part of the reason is that the word sustainability is really not a very useful term. You know, I mean, it's like Zeno's paradox. When does the arrow hit the target? When do you achieve sustainability? And then what? It really wasn't useful. It was latched onto and used, of course, to this day ubiquitously. But regeneration is innate to being a human being. I mean, all 30 trillion cells in your body are regenerating every nanosecond, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it is innate to life itself, and it is the default mode of life. And we have to sort of step back and look at this, I think, from a larger perspective, which is inclusive of everything that's being recommended by the IPCC and other climate scientists and so forth. But I feel, like I say, it's been a very narrow, you know, window of where people thought they could be effective. And so regeneration is about regenerating everything. Yeah. And it's almost saying, and in fact it is saying, that we need to focus on human well-being and the vibrancy of our soils, of our lands, of our forests, of our oceans, of our cultures, of our cities. So this is, if we focus that, the outcome is reversing global warming. But if we just focus on global warming, what you get is people proposing that we have these giant sucking machines, called direct air capture, and we're going to take this carbon and liquefy it and inject it into geological formations. And the fact is that technology, when it tries to fix the errors and the problems of technology, often causes new problems, and it doesn't solve them. And that when we think that way, we forget that carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere wants to come back home. This is where it came from. It was either ancient carbon in terms of fossil fuels, or current in terms of industrial agriculture, deforestation, degraded land caused by ranching methods and so forth. It wants to come back home. Carbon dioxide is food for a living earth. It's not a pollutant that we want to liquefy and stick down into geological formations. And so I think that when you have solutions and quote marks like that, what it does to human beings is like, well, I hope they get that done, whoever they are. It's Bill Gates, it's this and that. And again, it disempowers people from being active, from doing things they can do together. And what we try to say in that book is there's no such thing as an individual. That's your ego wakes up with that illusion every morning. But the fact is we're part of complex networks. Our families, our neighborhoods, our church, our synagogue, our temples, our schools, our cities, where we work, the companies, our institutions and so forth. Those are all who we are. We're complex networks, just like everything in life. There's no such thing as a molecule all by itself sitting around or, I'm life. It doesn't exist that way. And we're the same. And so we have to see that basically, that it's the middle that's between the top and the bottom. The middle has to become active, and it is becoming active. And it was local or regional or municipal or corporate or this and that, rather than looking only to the Conference of the Parties or only to governments, and saying, okay, I'm going to recycle my plastic today. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Ride my bike. All good, no question about it. But what we're missing is the vast possibilities of that other 98% of humanity and how they can get engaged. And so that's really what regeneration is about, because that road to degeneration, we can see the end of that. That's what the sixth assessment says. We are degenerating on the surface, on the biosphere. And every economic institution that we have, every economic sector, if you pull the string on the flour bag on their supply chain and go down, you don't have to go very far, well, you see that what we do takes life. It is extracting life. These are extractive economic institutions. And when you take life, that is degeneration. And so what regeneration is saying, do we want to continue to steal the future? Because that's what we're doing. We're stealing the future from our children and their children's children, etc. And we're saying we can do a 180 and we can have a GDP, we can have an economy that heals the future. And that is what regeneration is fundamentally about.
That's great, Paul. Thank you very, very much for that. I like that focus on well-being. And as you said, the regeneration is the base of life, so the floor upon which we all stand. Sonia, I can see you're wanting to comment on something.
Yeah, no, a few things.
Get in there.
So I think there are points where I totally agree with Paul. Some others I would be a bit maybe more careful. I think about the fact that we are starting to see some unprecedented events. I mean, definitely, this is also evidence from the report. I think that's one main conclusion that we have in the report, that basically in recent years we have started to see events where we can say, no, the likelihood was near zero, basically, without human-induced climate change. So we are starting to get into this regime where we are seeing events which we cannot explain without the influence of of a human-induced climate change, and we need to be aware, and that's why also we see it better, because it's not only about some events happening more often, it's about new events happening that we were not facing in the past. So that's very clear, and maybe that's also why we are more aware of the issue. About having a different type of storytelling, I totally agree with you, Paul, that I think we need also to give a vision for the future. It's not enough just to say, to show this disastrous future and say, oh, you need to be afraid of this. You need to have a vision for the alternative future, which would be a nice world. And I totally agree with you. And actually, so I was also involved in the IPCC special report on 1.5 degree. And there, together with other authors, we wrote a box in which we had storylines. So we wanted also to convey this idea that we are basically at a junction. We have to choose between different futures. And I think there is actually some propaganda that is trying to tell us if we manage to have climate mitigation, it might be very hard. We are going to have to take cold showers and so on. And we need to show that this world would be a nice world to live in, and definitely much better than the one we are going towards, where we would have much more extreme events, much more climate extremes affecting us. And so just realizing we have a choice, and one of this world is nice. I definitely agree. Now about CO2, because you said CO2 is not really a pollutant. To me, it is a pollutant. So I mean, obviously it is a natural component in the sense that it comes from the vegetation, but I mean, the problem is we are releasing too much of it by burning fossil fuels. So this carbon should have stayed where it was, which was in this fossil carbon. And the problem, I would say, and so definitely vegetation can help us a lot. I definitely agree. And one main issue is that also we are cutting down forests. But the main emissions we have are from burning these fossil fuels, and we won't be able to compensate this alone with nature-based solution. We need basically to cut down our emissions. And so if we want to get to net zero, we need basically to stop emitting. Plus, of course, we need also to have some help from vegetation and nature-based solutions. But I think it's important to also say we are still putting a lot of the CO2 in the air. If we were to stop all emissions now, temperature would be stabilizing.
So when you're looking at that, Sonia, and this is part of your research, looking at the models, the models keep getting better and better, and you said they're confirming what we've known, where we suspect it was going to be happening at this point in time. Then if we look forward, say another 20 years, and looking at humanity, and we seem to not always do things and still we understand that it's impacting me, right? What are some of the things which all the me's need to feel, or what would you say we need to be doing to help advocate for this urgency, which I feel you said a couple of times?
Yeah. Well, I think there I totally agree with Paul that it's a systemic problem. Yeah. So it's not. There is some danger about always bringing this back to single people. So I mean, we need to be aware. We need to change our behavior, but we need also to change the system. So we cannot, forget about the system, and so it will need to be a systemic change, definitely. But in terms of what we can do, it's doing any actions that help change the system. So, and part of this is own actions, but I mean, it can be, in the US, I don't know how you can influence the politics, but in Switzerland, definitely you can do some bottom-up initiatives. You can make some suggestions. So there are really a range of ways in which you can influence the world we live in, and realizing, every step, everything is needed. So when we were talking about drawdowns, there were a lot of different solutions. I think one point that was very clear from the 1.5 report was we don't have a single measure that is going to be the solution. We need to use all the solutions we have because it's already too late. Basically, we need to do everything we can.
So I'm going to pick up what you just said at the very, very last. It's almost too late, or I'm going to say it's almost too late. It's not already too late, because I was just hosting another something past 4 days called Year 2040. And one of the things we felt from the young individuals who were there, when they heard that 1.5 is essentially baked in, you could feel the fear in them. I think you could feel almost a fear in the room, like, oh my gosh, now what?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what do we say to someone who says, oh my God, it scares the blank out of me?
So I think the important point is there are tipping points within the climate system, but still, I mean, it's not like there is this one magic kind of limit and everything is safe before that and everything is bad after that. It's just getting worse. And we already, so it's already too late in the sense that we already have people who are dying from climate change. So from this point of view, you can say it's too late because we're already having impacts which are bad. I mean, people are dying from it. But still, of course, you can limit the worst by acting quickly. You can avoid the worst scenario. So I would say, any efforts we can do, anything we can achieve can limit basically how much impacts we are going to have in the future. So it should be motivation just to get active and do all what we can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Paul, what about you? How would you say that? Oh, I don't hear you. Looks like your audio's gone again. Okay. So I'm going to come back and ask another question. So, Sonia, when we think about the actions we could take now,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say we truly can fundamentally change our behaviors, we see as the Northern Hemisphere starts to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And how long until, how long can we, the question is, when can we expect the return? This is the return on the investment. We do these things now. 5 years we see changes, 10 years, the system's moving. When? Will my children feel this change? Or,
yeah, so your children will see it. But I mean, it takes time until you can basically be sure that the change has been happening. But yeah, basically in the scenarios, you would see a clear difference in 2050. So I would say in about 30 years from now, if we act right now.
Okay.
But I mean, we would start seeing also some changes before. So, basically what we need to do, I mean, the main source of CO2 emissions are fossil fuels. So what we need is just to get rid of fossil fuels. It's basically getting rid of using coal, of using oil, of using gas. And I would say for those parts, a lot can be achieved with renewable energy. So, I mean, we have, there are alternatives in many of those sectors. There are other areas in which it will take more time. Yeah.
Okay. So, Paul, I think you're back with us again?
Yeah, I hope so.
You are. You're here. Thank you. So how would you respond to the fear question?
I would respond to many things that Sonia said, that the way, I call it climate speak, and it absolutely alienates people.
Mm-hmm.
People, if you go down the street, ask people, what do you think of 1.5C? And they're going, what are you talking about? 1.5C what? And in the United States, they'd say, what's C? They don't even know what C is. They think of F, Fahrenheit. And then just the language about avoiding the worst. Okay, avoiding the worst, really, or nature-based solutions. It's like the IPCC discovered nature-based solutions 2 reports ago. They were never talking about it. And I absolutely agree that the renewable energy has to replace combustion. We have to stop burning things, period, okay? Whether it's our forests or whether it's gas in our cars. There's no question about that. If we don't do that, then it's game over. I mean, we have to do that. But to focus on that only, basically, still is a very narrow way of looking at the future. We work with Clover Hogan at Force of Nature. She's 24 years old. With the American Psychological Association, she did a survey of youth between 15 and 25 in 52 countries, and 70% of them are worried and depressed about climate, all right? And so what's happening, and this is what you get from climate speak, which comes out of science and so forth, is you get a constant barrage of probabilities of what's going to happen. Okay, this is good science. It's a really bad psychology, though, because it doesn't talk about possibilities. And so you can talk about possibilities and accept the science, honor it, and get it, say, fantastic, you did a great job, got it. Now, what are we going to do? But if we keep talking about mitigation, which only means reducing the pain of something, that's what mitigation means. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to mitigate today. All right. So the whole language around climate has been one that, frankly, is off-putting. At the same time, in agreement with what the science is saying, is that the climate movement will become the biggest movement on Earth. And now, what would you say the movement is? It's action. And the reason it will become so is because of weather, not because of some leader, organization, or idea even. Weather. And weather is the determining factor here, because for years, the climate crisis or global warming has been a concept, and people eventually turned off from listening to it. And now it's becoming experiential. That is an inflection point on Earth, in society, with humanity, where this is personal. This is me. This is my family, my farm, my future, my city, my whatever. And so we are at that, I feel like we're at an inflection point that is much more teachable than the way the climate speak has existed for 20, 30 years, which is really basically turned people off. And so I think science itself scientists never took a communication class. And so the way science is communicated has absolutely guaranteed that most people will not get involved. So regeneration is an attempt to try to honor the science, but actually to communicate in a different, more inclusive way, and go towards possibility without denying the probability. In fact, using that as a basis to go to possibility and so forth. And I think of Wendell Berry's quote, which is, be joyous though you've considered all the facts. In other words, okay, got it, but are we going to live hangdog for the rest of our life, completely depressed about it, completely like, oh my God, we're going to avoid, my goal in life is to avoid the worst. That's not a goal. And so that's why regeneration is so important as a concept and as a movement today.
Thanks, Paul. Sonia, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Paul. I mean, that's what I said. Even within IPCC, I mentioned what we did in the 1.5 report. So we wrote those storylines, and we were aware of, basically, we need to show this alternative world with not only avoids many changes in extremes, but is actually a nice world to live in. And I think we need to communicate this. And I'm fully agreeing on this point. On the other point, on the other hand, we need to be aware what we are seeing right now. Yes, we are seeing with weather happening right now that we are already in a bad situation, and if we don't do anything, it's going to get even worse. So for me, there is really a sense of urgency. We need to communicate, and I would say that's why we also need to have really quick action. And I would say for me, I like the concept of regeneration. For me, that's a long-term goal. But I also think besides this long-term goal, and that's basically why we would be aiming, we need to think of these short-term actions we can do to really stop burning things, as you were saying. That's because we know that's the problem.
Let me come in on that, because somehow, I wish you could see the book. The second part of the book is agency and urgency. So we're not dying. We're not like, walking into the meadow, and planting, wildflowers. That's not what we're talking about here. We took the data from the IEA, the World Bank, and from the IPCC and McKinsey. And I'll put the IPCC out of this, McKinsey, World Bank, and IEA. And they predict the rate at which renewables will grow, solar and wind, and the rate at which the cost will go down. They have been wrong every year for 20 years without exception. They miscalculated. The growth was greater and the cost fell further, faster.
Yep.
And so in regeneration, we talk about wind and solar, and we say, we're not going to take McKinsey and IEA numbers and so forth. We're going to take what has happened to date in terms of the growth of renewables. And we look at it from that point of view. We see renewables basically being 98% of energy in the world by 2042. In other words,
Really?
and so this again, I don't want you to think that somehow regeneration is about it is about a long-term future. That's what people want.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't want to be short-term made afraid
Right.
and using fear. And the thing that you use again and again, Sonia, in language is we. Okay, when I had the book edited by a decolonization editor, that is the citizen Potawatomi indigenous teacher at University of Michigan and so forth, and the first page he circled we and said, who's we? We don't speak for we. None of us do. And so it's us, but it's not we. There's a real difference between that. And so when we speak that we have to, we need, we this, we that, we also, in a sense, exclude people, because people say, well, wait a minute, you don't speak for me. And what we need to do is create this spaciousness for people to come to understand their role, their responsibility, and the possibility that exists right now. And it's not like regeneration is somewhere in the future, but right now we need the fire engines and the fire hoses to put out the fire, and so forth. Again, that thinking goes to the amygdala, it goes to fear. And the language around climate change has been about fear, shame, guilt, threat. And if you want to really turn people off and make them numb, we know from Neuroscience 101 that's how you do it.
Sure.
And yet the science is impeccable. And that I agree. So I'm not in any way criticizing the science. I'm talking about, can we communicate in a way that's a lot more effective?
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it sounds like, just listening to you right now, Paul, you're doing a great job in communicating your passion for where we need to head. So I think that's really very, very striking, especially as you're describing those two letters which we like to use, and here we are a we, and as you said, who is the we? Sonia, any comments to what he just said? Otherwise I have a question for you.
Yeah, no, I think basically I don't think we fundamentally agree between Paul and I, and but to me there is this tension between the two elements, the fact that there is a future, I guess our population would like to reach, if I'm not using we. I still feel, and on the other hand, there are things that are dangerous, and as a climate scientist, I think I do need to wake up the alarm. I do feel this type of responsibility.
Yeah. And there must be, as a tension between what you see that's happening on to Mother Earth, and then what you see is happening in our societies, right? And this is what I think, when we first sat down, you're talking about the urgency, and this is this urgency, because as a climate scientist, you see what's happening, and then the inaction which we feel. And I want to flip this to the positive again, and say, so within the futurist world, we like to often say the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. If that's already the case, where are we seeing on our planet, and so to both of you, some behavioral patterns which we need to be looking at and saying, hey, they're doing really well there. They've kind of figured it out, either it's around regeneration or some of the work with the land use and things like that. Where are some of these lessons that you see that we should actually everyone who's listening right now should actually make sure they know? Do either of you know?
Well, I think the main idea that comes to my mind is actually what is being done in Bhutan. So actually, Bhutan is one of the only countries which actually is not, emitting, too much CO2 because they have a lot of forests. But interestingly, they also have another indicator, the happiness indicator,
Right.
and I think that's certainly one issue we have in most of our societies. We're focused on GDP, so maybe having other measures of success for all of us as individuals, as society, and saying what we want to optimize is happiness. It's not necessarily production. money. And to me, that would be actually the main point.
That's a great one. And for those who don't know it, it's really worth looking at. As you said, that's the only country that was actually in the last report was green. I think that was the day they're doing it. Yeah. So Paul, what about you? What would you say?
I would say something very, very different. I've been to Bhutan, I've met the king and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's a very, very special case. The world is not going to Bhutanize itself. It should, by the way. Their indicators are so much better, but it's not going to happen. Costa Rica was the other country that sort of came close to meeting the Paris Agreement, but that's the same reason, trees, and they just had lots of trees and so forth. So that's not really going to happen for most other countries. I would say this, again, what the IPCC has done and what climate scientists have done is then say, oh yeah, and those nature-based solutions, we're all nature, the whole biosphere is nature. So the idea that there's nature-based solutions, they still are deminimized and so forth. But let me look at it another way, there's 3,300 billion tons of sea carbon above and below the soil in our terrestrial systems. And that number keeps going up every year. There's a new report coming out of Russia that's going to increase it. It was like 1,000, 1,500. Now it's 3,300. Okay. If we increase the amount of carbon in our farmlands by reforestation, in our grasslands, in our wetlands, by restoring them in our mangroves and so forth, by 9% by 2050, we will have offset or sequestered every bit of carbon dioxide emitted since 1800 by human beings. Okay. So that's a very different way to look at nature, okay, but the living system called Earth and our capacity. You go outside now, you look at any landscape, you look at a farm and shifting from industrial ag, which is destructive, to regenerative ag in various forms. You look at reforestation, you look at proforestation, you look at changes in how we manage animals, you look at the fact there's 2 billion hectares of degraded land and you can put more water in an empty.
We just lost you, Paul. Just lost you. Sorry about that. But I hear what you were saying is this: basically, to truly focus on what we can be doing now everywhere. And that I'm just going to putting some words into that. I think I want to ask you one question, Sonia, until Paul comes back, and that is, where do you go personally to regenerate? Do you go to the mountains? Do you go down to the lake? Do you go and hang out with friends? Because regeneration is also for us as humans.
Yeah. Well, I like to be in nature, definitely. Yeah. I mean, be it in the mountains, in the forest, or close to the sea. Yeah.
And so I think this is same for you, Paul. Where do you go to regenerate? Do you go down to Muir Woods or out to the beach, or where's your?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm very lucky. If I could take the camera, maybe I should take the camera and just turn it 180. I live in the woods. I live in nature. Foxes come in to my living room when I'm in the other room and get in the chairs and get comfortable. I have ravens that actually have adopted us. I have coyotes. I live around animals. I live around this beautiful air from the Pacific. I'm very, very, very fortunate,
Well, let me.
Yeah.
I think that I thank you for both of you for that, because this is also when I need to regenerate my own soul, this is what I'll do as well. And I think it's really important for all of us who are on the call, to think all the things that we can be doing to make sure we're saving, preserving, encouraging, and regenerating those places which we go to regenerate. I think this is an awful lot about what this is about, how to regenerate our planet for the next generations. And I think this has a lot to do with healing, right? This is what the idea of the conversation at the very beginning was, healing our future, and part of this also has to do with healing ourselves and the importance of that. And so it's that. So right. Paul, Unfortunately, our time is over. Sonia, our time is out. There's nothing better when we're hosting a conversation to say, I wish we could do this for another hour. Because it has truly been...
Thank you so much.
It has truly been a pleasure to have both of you here in the studio with us. And for all of us here online, thank you for choosing to be with us at this hour. Our next global lecture is going to be on the 19th of October with civil engineer and self-proclaimed space enthusiast, Ardava Tinzani. So I hope you'll be able to join us then. So once again, Paul, Sonia, thank you, and have a regenerative day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.